Tonight, deepening the diplomatic bond. The leaders of Israel and the United States meet at the White House.
We're certainly hopeful, and that's the president's direction.
To discuss the hostages, the peace plan between Israel and Hamas, and the future of the Middle East. And tit-for-tat tariffs.
It was a retaliatory tariff on China for the last 4 years.
China responds to President Trump's trade war. Plus, poison pills. Congress tackles the fentanyl crisis, examining a possible change to its classification as an illicit drug. And reliving the past. This daughter of the Holocaust faces anti-Semitism after chronicling her father's story.
Someone once pointed out to me that we're going through Holocaust 2.0.
But we're living in a time where we are seeing that never again is now.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. A high-stakes meeting at the White House tonight. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meets with President Trump. Good evening in Washington. I'm John Jessup. Welcome to Faith Nation. Well, the meeting comes at a critical time as dozens of hostages remain in Gaza and their fate hanging on a fragile ceasefire with Hamas. With Trump now back in power, Netanyahu is leaning on an old ally, one who has vowed unwavering support. And for Trump, this is about more than just Israel. He's looking to reshape the future of the Middle East on his terms. CBN senior White House correspondent Kelly Wright reports on what's at stake in this pivotal meeting from the White House.
John, this is President Trump's first meeting with a foreign leader here at the White House. He and Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described their meeting as being very pivotal in dealing with the temporary Israel-Hamas ceasefire and ensuring that all of the hostages are returned home, plus bringing an end to the 15-month-long war. Now, prior to the two leaders meeting, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Special Envoy to the Middle East Steve Witkoff met with reporters to discuss some of the details in moving forward, including how to handle the future of the Palestinian people in Gaza.
In any city in the United States of America, if you had damage that was 1/100th of what I saw in Gaza, and I went there at the direction of the President and the National Security Advisor, so we would know right very specifically what was going on, nobody would be allowed to go back to their homes. That's how dangerous it is.
The two leaders are also expected to discuss how to end Hamas rule over Gaza, plus a possible return to the Abraham Accords, which includes a way of seeking relations and normalizing relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. At the White House, Kelly Wright, CBN News. John?
Thank you, Kelly. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell joins us now from Jerusalem. Chris, I'm wondering, how are the neighbors in the Middle East viewing Netanyahu's visit, especially as you think about regional players like Iran and Saudi Arabia?
Well, first of all, John, I think the immediate neighbors, Egypt and Jordan, are refusing, or right now at least rejecting President Trump's idea that they would resettle some of these Gazans into their countries. I would just add to what Steve Witkoff said. I was in Khan Yunis a few months ago, and I would agree the devastation there is amazing. Trump calls it a demolition zone, but it would be very hard for anybody to live there for a long time. In terms of the other neighbors, Iran is looking at this warily because they know that Trump and Netanyahu probably will want to be on the same page in terms of Iran. I understand President Trump has signed an executive order asking for maximum pressure once again on Iran. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, is looking to possible normalization with Israel. The key sticking point there is that Saudi Arabia wants to make sure there's a Palestinian state. Many here in Israel, in fact, a majority of Israelis don't want to see any Palestinian state either in Gaza or in Judea and Samaria.
Chris, how might this meeting impact the efforts to maintain a ceasefire, the fragile ceasefire, or advance negotiations for the release of more hostages?
Well, I think everybody wants to see the release of more hostages. The question is, at what price? Really soon, actually right now, they're going into negotiations for phase two. Phase two would actually probably bring an end to the war. That's exactly what Hamas wants. They want to use those hostages as leverage to make sure that IDF forces stay out of Gaza. But it's not clear right now whether that's a price that Benjamin Netanyahu or Israelis are willing to pay to end the war. Many people on the southern border won't go back to their communities if they realize that Hamas is still in control of the Gaza Strip.
Chris, we learned earlier today President Trump said he's given explicit orders to, quote, obliterate Iran if they assassinate him, referring to an Iranian assassination attempt revealed late last year, and adding that there won't be anything left if Iran kills him. That makes it more likely, does it not, for the United States to potentially support an Israeli strike against Iran? What would that mean for the region?
Well, first of all, it sounds like a man who's had 2 assassination attempts on his life, and many reports that Iran wanted to assassinate him. It really does seem like maybe this would put the U.S. and Israel on a common denominator to make sure that maybe this is the time for the U.S. and Israel to go ahead and attack Iran's nuclear facilities, or if the U.S. would simply give the green light to Israel. We know now that they're also giving more munitions to Israel that could be used in a possible strike against Iran's nuclear facilities. And we understand now that Iran may be accelerating their nuclear program with cruder and even faster nuclear weapons.
Chris, we just have a few seconds left, but I want to ask you about the Abraham Accords expanding. Which countries could be next, according to President Trump?
Well, it looks like Saudi Arabia, and whether or not they're going to have this normalization, this would expand the Abraham Accords exponentially, something they wanted to do at the end of the first Trump administration. We'll see exactly what happens. But as I said, it's really this balance between sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, or there will be normalization and expand the Abraham Accords. We're going to see more clearly what's going to happen after today's meeting.
All right, CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell reporting in Jerusalem on a very late night. Thank you so much for your insights, Chris.
Thanks, Sean.
Well, China is hitting back at the United States with new tariffs on American goods, raising tensions just days into President Trump's second term. Some U.S. imports like coal and natural gas will face a 15% tariff starting February 10th. Other products, including crude oil, farm equipment, and pickup trucks, will see a 10% hike. The move comes after Trump's 10% tariffs on Chinese goods took effect. The White House says Trump and China's President Xi will speak soon, and as Mr. Trump also works on trade talks with Canada and Mexico. And with that, let's bring in author and columnist Gordon Chang. Gordon, great to see you again. So talking about the significance of China's decision to impose these tariffs, what does it signal about the future of China and U.S. relations? And could the trade tensions spill over into other areas of U.S.-China relations like national security or diplomacy?
Yeah, I think that as we go forward, the tensions between the United States and China will only get worse. I know that President Trump wants a grand bargain, and maybe he'll be able to stitch one together, but it probably wouldn't last very long. Remember, he had his phase 1 trade deal of January 2020. That looked like it would work, but it fell apart within months because the Chinese dishonored it. And I think we're going to see the same thing now. With China's imposition of tariffs on American goods and the other measures that it took a few hours ago, it looks like this is going to be a fight. But we got to remember, we're the trade deficit country. We got all the ammo in a trade struggle.
Maybe having all the ammo, but you mentioned a fight. Do you think the escalation could lead to what some consider a full-blown trade war, or is there any room for negotiation?
Well, there's been a trade war going on for decades, and unfortunately, the United States refused to acknowledge it. Only you get to 2018 when President Trump imposed the Section 301 tariffs on China at a general 25% level, did the United States really start to fight back in any meaningful way. So this is a struggle that has gone on for a very long time. And since we're the trade deficit country, you got to remember, as of last November, our merchandise trade deficit with China was an astounding $270.4 billion through 11 months. And that means that China has a lot to lose should they want this struggle. And apparently they do. They think that they can intimidate President Trump into backing down. But, Trump is not the type of leader who is willing to be intimidated. So I think this is going to be a long-term fight between two very willful leaders.
I would have to agree with you there. While we have you, I think it's important to ask, critics of the Trump administration are saying his moves to shutter agencies like USAID hurts America's soft power and creates a void or vacuum for China or Russia to fill. What's your response to that?
There are a number of USAID programs that were not in U.S. interest, but some of them were, and we will suffer. But there's a broader issue here, and that is many people said the American political process couldn't deal with America's federal deficit until there was a crisis. Trump seems to be taking care of that before a crisis, and we need to get our house in order if we are going to end up in a full-blown struggle with China. So there will be some things that Trump does that do undermine America's standing in the world, but they very well may be necessary in order to get us ready for a longer-term fight with the Chinese.
All right, Gordon Chang, author and columnist, we so appreciate your time and your expertise on this. Thanks for joining us and have a great night. Well, some of President Trump's cabinet picks are one step closer to confirmation. Today, the Senate Finance Committee voted to move Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s nomination to be Secretary of Health and Human Services forward. The full Senate is set to vote on Attorney General nominee Pam Bondi very soon, and an update on Tulsi Gabbard, nominated to become Director of National Intelligence. She cleared the Senate Intel Committee today as well. Well, in other news, a grim update in that deadly mid-air collision over the Potomac River last week. Crews have recovered the remains of all 67 victims. 64 were on board American Airlines Flight 5342 before it collided with a Black Hawk helicopter last Wednesday. Investigators are still determining the cause of the collision. Coming up, cracking down on fentanyl, a new way lawmakers are looking to tackle the crisis when Faith Nation returns. Welcome back. Lawmakers in Washington soon could reclassify certain forms of fentanyl as Schedule I drugs, meaning there is no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. CBN national security correspondent Caitlin Burke joins us now. Caitlin, the move, as I understand, has bipartisan support and also could help authorities working to prevent its illegal use.
That's right, John. The use of fentanyl outside of hospitals is prohibited in the U.S. Still, traffickers and illicit drug manufacturers have sidestepped that law by producing fentanyl-related substances. While those drugs are almost identical to fentanyl, they often contain a single different ingredient, and in many cases, that result is even more deadly, although it would be considered legal. It's these drugs lawmakers are looking to reclassify. The federal government ordered a temporary restriction over these fentanyl-related substances in 2018. Now they're looking to make it permanent.
How long do we have to keep suffering through this attack on our children? This is not an easy problem to solve, but there are certain parts of the problem that are simple to address.
I'm sick and tired of excuses being made and people dying as a result of it. And I think it's time for us, on a bipartisan basis, to find things we agree with.
Considered the deadliest drug in American history, fentanyl resulted in nearly 75,000 deaths due to overdose in 2023. Sadly, many of those victims had no idea they were even taking the drug.
My son had consumed what he thought was a blue M30 oxycodone pill, but in fact had unknowingly, I repeat, unknowingly, ingested an illicitly manufactured counterfeit opioid made nothing more than filler, a binding agent, and illicit fentanyl.
Fentanyls are so toxic and lethal that they can be classified and have actually been used as chemical weapons. The lethal dose is merely 2 milligrams, equivalent to 5 grains of sand, meaning that 1 teaspoon can kill 2,000 people. That is what is in this packet of sugar.
In 2017, Dr. Timothy Westlake, an emergency room physician, helped create legislation outlawing all variations of fentanyl in his home state of Wisconsin. A year later, the DEA followed suit with a temporary nationwide restriction. It's set, however, to expire March 31st.
but Congress must take action and permanently close the spigot of FRSs. The fact is, you can't die from ingesting something never created, nor can you be incarcerated for trafficking something that does not exist. That's the beauty and simplicity of FRS scheduling.
The bipartisan Halt Fentanyl Act would permanently extend the ban by giving all fentanyl-related substances a Schedule I classification.
That'll increase penalties for trafficking and distribution. It also will streamline prosecution by removing the burden of proving whether a particular fentanyl analog is harmful. It would be illegal by default. And it would give authorities greater flexibility as well to target emerging fentanyl analogs before they flood the market.
Although lawmakers acknowledge this move will not solve America's fentanyl crisis, they agree it's a simple legislative fix guaranteed to save lives. John?
Some pretty powerful testimony there. Thank you, Caitlin. Well, up next, a daughter shares her father's Holocaust story only to face anti-Semitism herself. Her journey, next. Welcome back. We here at CBN News have been reporting on the rising tide of anti-Semitism. Among the latest victims, the daughter of a Holocaust survivor who set out to honor her father's story by publishing his experiences. She soon became the target of hatred herself. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has her story.
Melanie Saul's father survived the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp, where more than 1 million died in its gas chambers. Born and raised in Poland, Moishe Saul was 17 when the Nazis invaded. Growing up in the U.S., Melanie knew her father survived the Holocaust, although he didn't share what happened because he didn't want to burden his children. Melanie eventually interviewed him around age 85, and Moishe told her what he remembered. She wrote a book entitled A Daughter of the Holocaust. In it, she writes, "My dad often asks throughout his life, why did I survive and the rest of my family didn't? He has a deep sense of guilt that he lived, and his family members died horrible deaths. Many survivors of the Holocaust have this same sense of guilt."
And this book shares his story, but it also shares his coming to faith in Yeshua at the end of the book.
In 2024, Melanie self-published her work through Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing. She ordered 10 copies to be delivered to her son in Manhattan so she could pick them up on a visit to the U.S. Opening the box led to a disturbing surprise.
I was shocked to see vandalism, anti-Semitic vandalism. I flipped through the books because I ordered them to bring back to Israel to give to friends of mine.
What she found was appalling.
Liberate Palestine from the river to the sea. Every single book has something written in Free Palestine. Every one of the 10 books, so they're not useful to me at all.
After Melanie initially contacted Amazon, she was refused assistance, reportedly because the time limit for making complaints and receiving customer service had expired. Then CBN News notified Amazon of the issue, and a spokeswoman sent us this statement. "We have zero tolerance for book defacement and have contacted the author to apologize. We immediately launched an investigation and will take appropriate action based on our findings." Melanie received an apology from Kindle Direct Publishing Executive Customer Relations, which said in part, "First, I want to sincerely apologize, both for your incredibly troubling experience and the difficulties you've had thus far in reporting the issue to Amazon. We have escalated this issue to the highest levels of our organization, as we have zero tolerance for this kind of book defacement." She then reached out to the American Center for Law and Justice for help.
ACLJ, as soon as we saw the situation, immediately assigned lawyers who are experts in this area, did research to find out the relevant law, because there's federal law, there's state law, and put together a memo internally, and then put a demand out to Amazon, a legal letter to Amazon, to the general counsel, and he responded the very same day.
ACLJ lawyer Jeff Balaban says Amazon expressed concern about the issue and is looking into it.
We asked that they replace the books, and they're going to replace the books. Indeed, I believe they said they're replacing multiple copies of the book, so we'll wait and see that happens.
ACLJ also demanded an investigation.
Whoever did this presumably knows her family's address, because that's where the books were sent. And this could be a very dangerous person. It's certainly an unhinged person who hates Jews. And so it's very important that they investigate and discover who it is and give us satisfaction so that the client knows that she and her family are not threatened by this individual.
Balaban says ACLJ is seeking legal repercussions.
Amazon has already said they have zero tolerance for what they call book defacement. And this goes well beyond, this was defacement of books, but well beyond book defacement. I mean, this is clearly an act of hate, an act of anti-Semitism. So, yes, that person should be removed from their job.
So far, Melanie has received her money back, as well as the promise of more books. Melanie says her father would have been shocked and saddened by the defacement of the books.
Someone once pointed out to me that we're going through Holocaust 2.0, where there's anti-Semitic acts all over the world, there's anti-Semitic acts here. It would have just brought back the horrors that he went through the first time.
The most famous resolution or mantra or statement or idea to come out of the Holocaust was never again. But we're living in a time where we are seeing that never again is now.
Balaban says the desecration of Melanie's book is a small but powerful example of what's happening to the Jewish people in the U.S. and around the world.
The same hostile, evil energy seems to be alive in the world again. And the truth is, we know this, anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, it never goes away, and it can't be stopped. The problem is when it's all of a sudden, it's become open season. And the worst part of this is that what made it open season was the horrors of October 7th and the horrors of the atrocities. And all of a sudden, it's like this evil woke up in the world and said, oh, we can do this again? Let's go out and kill the Jews.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Julie, coming up, a look at how Super Bowl game balls are made. Next on.
Download the CBN News app. One place for all of your news. Breaking news alerts. Watch CBN News Channel live. CBN News, because truth matters. Get the CBN News app today.
Finally tonight, as soon as this year's Super Bowl matchup was set, it was all hands on deck at the Wilson Sporting Goods football factory. The company, located in rural Ohio, makes the game balls used by every NFL team, and they're preparing to send over 100 footballs to both teams competing on Super Bowl Sunday. Factory plant manager says it's a 20-step process from start to finish.
Being part of the story, being on the largest stage in the world in 2 weeks, so it's just the buzz, man. It's the pride that these people have in the craftsmanship that goes on out there.
The Kansas City Chiefs and Philadelphia Eagles will face off for the second time in 3 years on February 9th in New Orleans, and many people will be watching. And now you have a little bit of a factoid to add to your families when watching the game about how these footballs are made. Thanks so much for watching Faith Nation. Have a great night.